rare and balanced view on politics in today's world. Based on facts, born of rationality, common sense, and logic, providing context on today's events. This is American Perspective with Rick Thomas.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to American Perspective. I am your host, Rick. Well, everybody seems to be checking in and talking about Debbie, Hurricane Debbie. I guess she was potentially a little more... I don't even want to go there. Anyway, I'm glad to know that all of you folks are out there that are safe. Okay, let's just put it that way. I'm just going to be serious for a minute, even though what I was thinking was really not. Yeah. Anyway, all right, let's go ahead and get. Three Chevy says she was a meh. Oh, goodness gracious. All right, let's get some things kicked off here with regards to it. Tonight, to kick us off with the Pledge of Allegiance, I have the venerable, the great, the wonderful Judge Wild leading us in the call. So please, if you are of mind, stand, remove your hat, place your hand over your heart, and recite with Judge the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And thank you, Judge, for that wonderful rendition of the Pledge of Allegiance. I do appreciate it. Do me a favor, if you would like to have your Pledge of Allegiance played here on the broadcast, just record yourself doing it, obviously. And when you are done, send me the audio file. You can send that to my email address, fans@americanperspective.online. That's fans, FANS, @americanperspective.online. And I'll get you into the rotation. All right, so tonight's sponsor is me. And why am I my sponsor? Well, that's because I have this fantastic store that I would love for you to check out. It is store.americanperspective.online, where you can go and get logoed gear. I've got crew neck sweatshirts, t-shirts, hoodies, tank tops, water bottles, and let's see, what else do I have? Oh, yes, coffee mug too. There's also links to get redirected to where you can pick up the Constitution, the Saddleback leather-bound U.S. Constitution there, as well as my old Whiskey Musing store. You can still buy Whiskey Musing gear over there if you want that too. Go to store.americanperspective.online to find all of that stuff and check out my 3 variations of my logos there, and you can pick something out for yourself. Show your fandom. Show your fandom with the American Perspective show by picking yourself something up, and I do thank you for that. So, and for tonight, I'm wearing this is one of my t-shirts, just to show that off. I do wear my product, so there we go. And yeah, head on over to store.americanperspective.online, and I do thank you for the support. All right, so let's get this party started. Well, before I get into tonight's full-on topic, because there's plenty to talk about there, a couple of other things have occurred over the last several days, because, of course, we've been anticipating, we've been waiting with bated breath, we've been wondering, was it going to be Josh Shapiro? Was it going to be Tim Walz? Was it going to be Mark Kelly? Was it going to be somebody that was completely off the radar? Well, we have that answer now. Of course, it's going to be Tim Walz, but let's just be honest with ourselves. Up until about a month ago, maybe a little less than a month ago, nobody outside of the state of Minnesota actually knew who the hell Tim Walz was. More than that, we didn't even really care who Tim Walz was outside of the state of Minnesota. Well, she went ahead and made her pick. But again, I've got more on that here in just a little bit. But right now, I've got to tell you about a few stories that have come up that are pretty damn important, to be honest with you. First one up is the fact that Google has now been called to task for its practices in terms of the searches and textual searches. Right here. Google loses their antitrust case over their searching and their text searching, text advertising, by the way. So Google, which of course started off, its simple mission statement was to do no harm. Well, now it seems they have done harm. And as of course everybody knows, they omitted the entire Trump assassination attempt from their autofill search. They blamed it on a bug, but let's face it, it wasn't a bug. We know it wasn't. But the federal judge ruled on Monday, that's yesterday, that Google has illegally held a monopoly in the search and text advertising. Now, here's the thing. The funny thing about it is other search engines, such as Bing, when it first rolled out, which Bing is supposed to stand for because it's not Google. Literally, that is the truth. That is where Bing came from. But Bing itself, in its first stages, when it first rolled out, was actually pointed to Google. I don't know if anybody remembers that, but they were actually attached into Google's back end and were able to search through Google and provide that up in Bing. The other thing too, by the way, is that DuckDuckGo was for a time, don't know if it still is this way, but was for a time connected into Google's search engine as well. So now, I mean, I don't know. When you create something that essentially collects all sorts of data from all over the world and all over the internet, it's kind of hard not to become the de facto database. But at the same time, though, they, rather than just saying, hey, we're collecting all this data, here's the database, they decided to say, hey, we're collecting all this data and here's what we want you to see. And that's the problem. They shouldn't have done that because that brought attention to themselves. If they'd have just left it alone and just said, look, we've collected all of this data. You can search the database however you want. You can do whatever, however you want. Here it is. Here's the database. And just left it at that, they wouldn't be in this particular situation. Now, the thing about it is this case actually started way back in 2020. It was the Department of Justice and a bipartisan group of attorneys general from 38 states and territories, originally led by Colorado and Nebraska, filed similar but separate antitrust suits in 2020, and it's taken this long to actually filter through the legal system. So now that they've done this, I'm not sure if Google's going to try and appeal this or not. But yeah, so the case from the government that was filed, like I said, in 2020, alleged that Google had kept its share of the general search market by creating strong barriers to entry and a feedback loop that sustained its dominance. The court found that Google had violated Section 2 of the Sherman Act, which outlaws monopolies. So this is the first time an anti-monopoly decision against a tech company has shown up in decades. So, I don't know what, I'll be honest with you, I don't know what this is going to do, but sort of like the whole Ma Bell thing, I wouldn't be surprised if there was a proposal to break up the entire Alphabet company to decentralize and regulate it or deregulate it, one or the other, from the company's control. So anyway, we'll kind of have to see what happens with that. Also, too, just to kind of bring this in, heading toward the, the topic here. A scathing report reveals that Biden-Harris admin, notice how they're starting to call it the Biden-Harris admin, has released dozens of migrants on the terror watch list into the United States. Now, the report itself was issued by House Judiciary Committee Republicans, and they basically say that nearly 100 illegal aliens on the terror watch list have been released into the United States during the Biden administration, while Border Patrol agents have encountered migrants on the watch list from dozens of different countries. This new House report is revealing. The House report, a copy of which was first obtained by Fox News Digital, states, under the Biden-Harris administration, of the more than 250 illegal aliens on the terrorist watch list who were encountered by Border Patrol at the southwest border between fiscal years 2021 and 2023, DHS has actually released into American communities at least 99, with at least 34 others that are still in DHS custody but not yet removed from the United States. So this was a staff interim report that also found that immigration judges granted bond to at least 27 illegal aliens on the watch list who entered illegally, of course, and that Border Patrol has encountered tens of thousands of migrants from countries that could present national security risks, including 2,134 Afghan nationals, 33,347 Chinese nationals, 541 Iranian nationals, 520 Syrian nationals, and 3,104 Uzbekistan nationals. Yeah. So the whole border czar and her control of it really has fallen big time. Now, this also doesn't include, keep in mind that this doesn't include the number of potential terrorists that evaded Border Patrol and entered the United States as part of the nearly 2 million, quote, gotaways since the beginning of the Biden-Harris administration. So, yeah. So there we go. Oh, the immigration. Let's face it. Biden didn't really care because he could have shut the border down a long time before this. And Harris, of course, wanted to make illegal aliens no longer illegal. She wants to make border crossings a non-starter for everybody. She wants to make it so that if you cross the border, it's actually not criminalized. What a moron. Well, considering the fact that Kamala, which is how they get mad when people mispronounce her name, and by they I mean Democrats. But anyway, Kamala la ding dong, or whatever you want to call her. She was supposed to be, she was supposed to be not the border czar, but she was supposed to be in charge of what is considered the Northern Triangle. And she was supposed to try and figure out how and why migration occurs from that specific area, if you listen to the Democrats. That she was not the border czar. Well, even if you say that she wasn't the border czar and it's not her fault that all of these Kamalama Ding Dong people have crossed, that it's not because of her, this report will show you that she is still a moron, still ineffective, still incompetent, still has not done her job. Right here in the Washington Examiner. Border crossings from the Northern Triangle up nearly 400% since she was named border czar. So in the piece here, they talk about the border crossings of citizens of the Northern Triangle nations began Donald Trump's presidency, and I'm talking about Donald, of course, but Donald Trump's presidency at 162,891 in fiscal year 2017 and ended at 106,762 crossings in fiscal 2020. For those of you that can't do math, that dropped about 55,000 over the course of those 3 or 4 years. Border Patrol then recorded an explosion of 701,49 crossings by migrants from where the area that they call the Northern Triangle in fiscal 2021. So in other words, it was a 700% increase. Okay. Crossings from the 3 countries that they call the Northern Triangle have somewhat abated down to about 500,000 in fiscal 2022, fiscal 2023, and in the past 12 months ending in June of 2024, which by itself saw 548,596. But that's still around a 400% increase from the only 3 countries that Harris was specifically tasked to tackle. So the cackler was supposed to tackle the Northern Triangle and try to stop what was considered migration from the Northern Triangle, which is actually illegal aliens crossing the border from the Northern Triangle region. And it actually went up. Not a 50%, not 100%, but 400% in the time that she herself was in charge of that Tri-County area. Yeah. That's whether she was border czar or not, she's still ineffective. She still doesn't know what she's doing. She's still freaking incompetent. She should have been fired after a 400% increase. Seriously? Yeah. Yeah. We're not even going here. Let's be honest. We're not even going here. The oatmeal brains didn't know what the hell he was doing, and he went ahead and just let her do whatever she wanted, because as he said when he announced it, that any command from her should be just like a command from him, regardless. So, yeah, anyway, whatever. She is incompetent, and we want her for another 4 years? I don't think so, Scooter. Well, on another angle, Kamala Harris, which I'll be honest with you, I really would like to see how she's going to do this, because the executive doesn't have control especially over this part of the government and where we get our money. But hey, whatever. I mean, shoot, Joe Biden seems to ignore it all the time when it comes to things like student loan forgiveness and all of that stuff. But here from MRC TV, Kamala keeps vowing to repeal tax cuts. This would happen if she does. Now, the piece, is talking about, now, let's be honest, let's not beat around the bush here. Biden wants to let the tax cuts expire. He was planning on getting rid of them in 2025. All right. Well, she, on the other hand, has said that she will repeal the Tax Cuts and Job Act on day one. Trying to understand how that's going to happen, because in order for a law to get repealed, it has to go through Congress to have a new law written that repeals the old law. So it's not her doing it. She's the executive branch. She enacts, or she ensures that the laws are carried out. She doesn't make law. And this is part of the problem. This is where I'm saying where she and Joe, they don't understand our Constitution. They have absolutely no idea what our Constitution actually entails. But that being said, if she were to get shall we say, oh, I just had the word in my head, a Congress that would allow her to do this, okay, and would work with her. The Tax Foundation explains that the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, passed in December of 2017, made several significant changes to the individual income tax. These changes included a nearly double standard reduction, new limitations on itemized deduction, reduced income tax rates, and reforms to several other provisions. In all, these changes simplify the individual income tax by eliminating the need for millions of households to itemize their deductions. Now, after September 31st, 2025, most of the changes will revert to the pre-TCJA status. And if Congress allows these changes to go into effect, most households would experience tax increases beginning in 2026. In the meantime, however, individual income taxes will be substantially lower for households across the income spectrum. Now, that flies in the face of the Democrats always saying that the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, all it did was benefit big business and rich people. It didn't. It kept things low across the spectrum, and I keep pointing this out all the time. But if Harris isn't willing to wait for the tax law and its benefits to expire, Harris would end up with a repealing of the tax bill that would result in an across-the-board income tax increase, an increase in the so-called death tax, a small business tax hike, termination of the doubled child tax credit and the expanded standard deduction, and an imposition of 35% federal corporate income tax rate, a rate that is even higher than communist China and Maduro's Venezuela. Now, Donald Trump, on the other hand, has his intention to try and make those tax benefits and expand them, but also make them permanent. So even on this particular piece alone, if you are a tax-paying American who hates the fact that you are paying so much in taxes, you will never vote for Kamala Harris. Just on that one issue alone, you will never vote for Kamala Harris. Now, I saw an article. I didn't put it in the show notes. I was thinking about it, but I saw an article that basically broke down. Do you realize that 76% of our taxes are currently going to interest payments only? We're not even touching the principal on our loans in the U.S. 76%. Think about that. 3/4 of the tax money that you are putting in is going toward the interest payments that we currently carry on all of our debt. That's just asinine. All right. So let's talk a little bit about the new VP pick. The new VP pick. So Tim Walz, and it's Walz. I thought it was Waltz, but it's Walz. W-A-L-Z. Tim Walz is an interesting fellow. He comes from the land of 1,000 lakes, known as the state of Minnesota. He is a progressive, a big progressive. In fact, he even admitted to at least appreciating and potentially liking the whole socialism thing. Let me explain to you why. Well, actually, let me just have him tell it to you in his own words. Right here. Take a listen.
But we can get out there, reach out, make the case. And for one thing, don't ever shy away from our progressive values. One person's socialism is another person's neighborliness.
One person's socialism is another person's neighborliness. Now, Tim Walz is credited for being the first person to basically break out the Trump-Vance Republican things with regards to being weird. He's the one that started that whole weird thing, which is still going on. I'll be honest with you, on the socials. I don't really give a shit one way or the other. Being called weird doesn't really surprise me any. But this guy, virtually unknown outside of Minnesota. Now, he spent some time in Congress, okay? Spent, quite a few years in Congress in comparison to somebody, say, like J.D. Vance or even Kamala Harris, as an example. But then he got elected to Minnesota's governor. And he was elected to Minnesota's governorship in, I believe it was 2018. And one of the things that he's known for, realistically over there, is the fact that he passed potentially the most COVID restrictions and tried to get them all encased into law to where and he declared an emergency. He was actually which a lot of them did. Okay. Well, let's just be honest here. A lot of those Democrats, they did call for emergencies. In fact, my own state had a dictator who was 2 weeks to eliminate the curve or to suppress the curve or whatever. And 972 days later, he finally released it. Just to give you a comparison, that was Governor Jay Inslee, who also ran for president and freaking failed. But anyway, and thank God we're getting rid of him. I don't care. It doesn't matter what he's done. He said he wasn't running again. Oh, what a moron. Anyway, I digress. So Walz, of course, put in all those restrictions and everything else. He shut down bars, he shut down schools, he shut down businesses. He did all kinds of things during the COVID era. And during the BLM riots, by the way, he didn't bother to bring out the National Guard. In fact, he even told the people who criticized him, what are we going to do? We're going to bring out the National Guard as a bunch of 19-year-old cooks? Yeah, that was, I'm paraphrased a little bit, but that was pretty damn close to the quote that he made. And he's a leftist. And so by naming him her VP, we now have what is considered to be the most radical candidate ticket in American history. Because both of them are leftists. Both of them are socialists. Both of them believe in the Marxist mantra to get you to socialism or communism. That's what they do. He is for transing children. He is for abortion. In fact, he's so for abortion, by the way, that according to this piece in the Daily Wire, he himself says that he is so for abortion that Nancy Pelosi suggested that he goes to a more moderate stance. He bragged about that. He said, my record is so pro-choice, Nancy Pelosi asked me if I should tone it down. I stand with Planned Parenthood. Yeah. And that was when he first ran for governor back in 2018, where he was talking about. Now, while he was a part of the House of Representatives from 2007 to 2019, he has a 0% pro-life score from the National Right to Life. And in fact, he actually made a mistake and voted for a bill in 2018 that would protect babies who survived botched abortions. He apologized and said that he accidentally voted yes on the measure. He said, accidentally voted for H.R. 4712 today. It was an honest mistake. I meant to vote no. as I did on an identical bill last Congress. My apologies for the confusion. I'll keep fighting for women's access to health care. Now, here's the thing. Health care, killing babies or killing an individual human life. Yeah, that doesn't equate. That doesn't count as health care, folks. In the bill that he did say yes to, but meant to vote no, would have required doctors to care for babies who were born still alive after failed abortions and then charge those doctors with murder if they end the life of the baby outside the womb. He signed a measure as governor in January of 2023 that effectively removed all restrictions on abortions. And they basically say, they meaning the Democrats, say that, yeah, there's no state that's actually doing abortions all the way up to 9 months. Yeah, guess what? Minnesota is. Republican lawmakers stated that the law would allow for abortions at any age in pregnancy. The legislation said every individual has a fundamental right to make autonomous decisions about the individual's own reproductive health, including the fundamental right to use or refuse reproductive health care. Yeah, he is clearly a pro-abortion advocate. We already know that they are going to push for, because Harris and all the Democrats, I should say, Harris, Walz, all of the Democrat lawmakers, even though the Dobbs decision clearly stated that it was not a federal government business to be in the business of abortions, they, just as much as they accuse Republicans of trying to ban abortion, which they can't, okay, this is a state decision. We've already gone through this multiple times. This is a state decision. 10th Amendment applies, so on and so forth. But yet here they are still talking about where they want to get abortions and allow them all the way across the board. Now, that isn't his only problem or his only issue, because we also have his other political records that could help or hurt Kamala Harris. So here in The Guardian, they were talking about how his pick is going to necessarily help him. Now, here's the thing, okay? And keep in mind with this, Walz is not from a swing state. Walz is not from a state that is potentially more purple than anything else. Minnesota has voted blue quite often. In fact, Minnesota was the only state during the 1984 Republican landslide victory of Ronald Reagan. Minnesota was the only state that went for the Democrat, Jimmy Carter. But here's some of his possibilities here. Is that he has, and these are things that, of course, everybody would like. He signed a bill last year that provided free breakfast and lunch for all students attending public and charter schools in Minnesota. It essentially would allow students to receive one free breakfast and lunch a day, regardless of their income. And that's the key, regardless of their income. Through the first few months it was in effect, the state saw a significant jump in the number of meals requested. When he was running for Congress in 2010, Walz received an A rating, believe it or not, from the National Rifle Association, because at that time the group cited his support for legislation allowing people to carry guns in national parks, as well as his decision to sign on to the pro-gun amicus brief that was done in the D.C. versus Heller 2008 Supreme Court case that significantly expanded the Second Amendment. I don't think it's expanded the Second Amendment. It just basically reaffirmed it. But since then, he is against gun ownership. He wants to enact red flag laws. He wants to expand background checks to include gun purchases to private transactions. In other words, he wants to create a de facto gun registry. He also favors what is called an assault weapons ban, which we know from 1994 did not do hardly anything, according to the DOJ's own report on it. Now, 3 Chevy asks a question in Rumble, is he popular in Minnesota? I checked it out. He has got about a 55% approval rating right now in Minnesota. When he ran for governor in 2018, Walz celebrated the fact that the NRA gave him an F rating and donated $18,000 to the group that the group had given him throughout his congressional career to a veterans group, according to CNBC. Okay. Now, he was the first governor, by the way, to enshrine the abortion protections into state law when the U.S. Supreme Court did overturn Roe v. Wade. He's also taken executive action to protect gender-affirming care. Now, let me be honest with you, that is not gender-affirming care. But he enacted also a paid family leave supported by a 0.7% payroll tax on employers. He's also approved legislation that requires Minnesota to generate all of its energy from carbon-free sources by 2040. He's also enacted an expansive slew of voting rights measures. Now, by voting rights, that means eroding our system of voting. He signed a bill late last year to make it easier with people with a felony conviction to vote in Minnesota. The measure automatically allows people with felonies to vote once they leave prison. They previously had to complete probation as well as parole. He approved a state-level Voting Rights Act, which cemented protections for minority voters at the state level as the U.S. Supreme Court chips away at the federal version of that law. He also enacted legislation that allows for automatic voter registrations, permits for 16 and 17-year-olds to pre-register to vote, and also lets Minnesotans sign up automatically to receive mail-in ballots. Legalize marijuana, which I'll be honest with you, I don't really care about that. I mean, whatever. But he also voted to approve a bill that allows undocumented people to get a driver's license. He also approved a bill. He didn't vote for it. He approved the bill that allows undocumented people to get a driver's license, which is exactly why I keep saying here on this program that the only legal document should be to prove for voter ID should be something that proves citizenship. Okay. That's what he did. That's what he's done. He is a far left progressive, and that is essentially where he comes from. In fact, there was one article that I was reading, I didn't include it here, but there was one article that I was reading that he actually envies California and wants to make Minnesota into the Midwest's California. He is, no wonder freaking Kamala Harris picked him. She loves him. She loves his progressive values. She loves the fact that he wants to be a socialist, essentially. He even admitted it. One man's socialism is another man's neighborliness. Now, one of the reasons why a lot of people think one of the reasons why I think that he was picked, by the way, has to deal with the idea that he is from the Midwest. He's supposed to be friendly, down to earth, down home, easygoing, easy conversationalist. Just kind of does the work and gets things done. And I think the reason why he's doing it is because of the fact that Kamala Harris had to, in the hopes that this guy will combat J.D. Vance's same kind of mannerisms and positioning when it comes to the working blue-collar worker that honestly comes from the area up there where Pennsylvania, Ohio, Wisconsin, Michigan, so on and so forth. And that is essentially where I believe why she picked him. Now, the clear and present 100% challenge in terms of Josh Shapiro not being picked is plain as day as the nose on my face. Josh Shapiro is Jewish. The Democrat left, Palestinian-loving, Hamas-loving, Hezbollah-loving radical base were freaking out about Josh Shapiro being the pick. Kamala Harris doesn't like Israel either. She doesn't like she's, I don't know if you can necessarily go and call her anti-Zionist, but she certainly has no love for the Israelis. And so she's sitting here and she picked a guy that she feels is going to help her. Now, one more thing that Walz did while he was governor, which thanks hat tip, of course, to 3 Chevy, one of my fantastic rumblers out there. He popped this up. And I got to tell you, it's kind of interesting to think. So I'm about to show you a picture. For those on the audio portion of the program, you'll have to run off to rumble.com and either that or, ScrewTube or Facebook or X to pick this up. But here's the thing. Walz was the one that created the quote unquote new flag for Minnesota. Now, most of the flags that we have for the states, yes, they were designed way back when they were first brought into the, for the most part, when they were first brought into the United States and so on and so forth. I mean, California had the bear, Oregon had the Oregon Trail with the Conestoga wagon on it. Washington has, of course, the picture of our great George Washington. Well, Minnesota had its rendition with regards to its past on a blue field. It had a circle with it, and kind of describing this for the audio listeners. It had a circle with some depiction of what Minnesota actually meant. Well, Walz, got it changed. The change is in the bottom left, the farthest one over, that way, okay? The farthest one over. Well, the third flag in this diagram, which is the one closest to my head in the video, is essentially the Somali flag. Somali? Wait a minute. Isn't there a large contingent of Somali settlers that came in? In fact, isn't Ilhan Omar, who's a Somali, born? She represents Minnesota's 5th congressional district, doesn't she? There could be some sort of a connection here to go from a great, wonderful image showing what Minnesota was actually all about when it was admitted into the Union versus a couple of blue fields with a, let's see, 2, 4, 6, 8 pointed star on it. What does that do? What does that do what does that do to represent Minnesota? It doesn't. All it is a very plain flag. Kamala Harris, honestly, has picked up who she thinks is the choice for essentially her radical base. That's pretty much who she picked. Now, there's one other scandal. Oh, actually, there's a couple scandals that I haven't even mentioned. First one is that Tim Walz apparently oversaw his Department of Education apparently boondoggling some COVID relief funds to the tune of like $250 million. And I've heard that essentially he is, or his Department of Education is being sued for it. I could be wrong on the suit part, but I'm pretty sure they're being investigated over the misuse of $250 million of COVID funds. Yeah. So that's interesting. That's quite interesting. But that's not the limit to his lies, by the way. And in fact, in this article in ABC News, okay, in this article, and I'm just going to point out a specific line within the article. Now, they, obviously ABC is left wing, and they're left wing leftist propaganda. And so they sit here and they say things like, it would be hard to find a more vivid representative of the American heartland than Walz, who was born in West Point, Nebraska, a community of about 3,500 people northwest of Omaha. Walz joined the Army National Guard and became a teacher in Nebraska. Hold that thought on the Army National Guard thing. Because further down, as they are talking about Walz's wonderful things that he has done, Walz served 24 years in the Army National Guard before retiring from a field artillery battalion in 2005 as a command sergeant major, one of the military's highest enlisted ranks. That line is really key because he apparently did not retire as a command sergeant major. And for him to claim as such, don't you think that would fall under the call of stolen valor? I would tend to think so. I mean, stolen valor is usually used for somebody who never served, who claims that they served, who maybe claims that they had some sort of a military award or something along those lines. Yeah. But that's not quite the case. And in fact, this actually came out when he was running for governor, and it was bypassed, by the way, by the mainstream media. So here, Alpha News, they put out a story from a fellow veteran. Now, this person, name of Tom Behrens, Behrens, who is a retired command sergeant major, who replaced Tim Walz on a deployment to Iraq. Now, what apparently had happened, according to this essentially eyewitness, I mean, let's just place it there, okay? What had happened was Walz was placed in as a interim command sergeant major of the unit. Now, for those of you that don't really understand what happens, Behrens kind of explains this. When you hit Master Sergeant, which is essentially an E8 rank in the Army, okay, you have an option sometimes to get promoted into what is considered to be Sergeant Major or Command Sergeant Major. Command Sergeant Major actually controls troops, whereas just being Sergeant Major doesn't, okay? But the thing is that when you're offered that position, you have a certain contractual obligation to fulfill. One of them is that you must go through what is called the United States Sergeant Major Academy. And when you go through that, okay, When you go through that, once you complete that, you must serve for 2 years minimum as a command sergeant major. Well, here's the problem. He was named command sergeant major of this unit. He would have been presented with that information and had probably signed a contract to the effect of that. But 7 months in, his unit got notice that they might be headed over to Iraq and that they were potentially going into the firefight. Walz, instead of being a good non-commissioned officer and caring for his troops, decided to retire. Now, because he did not retire as a command sergeant major, because of the fact that he did not complete the training, that he did not also, by the way, fulfill his contractual obligation, he was actually knocked back down to the rank of master sergeant. And there, in this particular article that I'm showing you right now, there actually is evidence and proof. They linked to it. They received some of his military records. They received, and I can show you, here is the military record or the military paperwork that basically knocked him back to what is a master sergeant. So for him to claim that he retired as a sergeant, as a sergeant major, or even a command sergeant major, which, by the way, is a high honor in the Army. That is like the top of the top of all of the military NCO ranks, the Army NCO ranks. Well, he apparently, like I said, he apparently left. And this guy, Tom Behrens, had to serve in his place. And this is why he knows about it and actually completed the training and the 2 years and actually retired as a command sergeant major. But it's not just him that's calling out this particular scenario. In fact, Alpha News found a couple of other command sergeant majors. In total now, counting Behrens, 3 command sergeant majors have all corroborated the same story that Walz dodged deployment to Iraq. Doug Julin, who is a retired command sergeant major, also said, "Why should we be quiet? He uses the military to promote himself when he abandoned his soldiers." Now, provided that all of this, of course, is true. All right. This is pretty sad. For a commander, for a leader, a true leader, to abandon his troops at a time where, if this had been a private or even like a corporal or possibly even a sergeant, although I can't see a sergeant doing this, but if he had just been an enlisted private and was able to get out of going to Iraq, I could understand that. But he spent 24 years of that. There is no dispute. But he spent most of his life as a National Guard member and a military person. And of course, the left is touting all of this. But he spent that time. He trained troops. He brought troops along. He reached what could have been the highest pinnacle of his career in the command sergeant major section. And he chickened out. And he literally ran. Which, by the way, somebody even mentioned, oh, no. In fact, his excuse, by the way, just to give credit to where it's due, his excuse was, well, I had to resign or retire because if I didn't, I wouldn't have been able to run for Congress. And that's not true. In fact, he could have gone to command and gotten an exception to be able to run for Congress. He also had enough time on his contract, by the way, because remember what I said is that he had to have time afterward to serve as Command Sergeant Major for a minimum of 2 years after going through the training and the courses. He could have had that time. His contract was extended to the point where it could have finished. Even after going over to Iraq and coming back and being a Command Sergeant Major for 2 years, he could have finished. But he didn't. Because he didn't want to go and serve in wartime. Now, I am a veteran. Notice I did not say that I am a combat veteran, but I am a veteran of the United States Army. And I'm going to tell you, as a young soldier, to have my leader, who I was supposed to look up to, and keep in mind, most of these people, when I went in, most of the time we've thought of things like, John Wayne or Clint Eastwood as being Gunnery Sergeant Highway. Those were who we looked up to in the military. Those were the people that we expected. But now, to have your Command Sergeant Major retire just because you're headed off to Iraq, that's not leadership. That doesn't instill leadership. It doesn't instill any sort of trust in your command when the top dog in your line decides to step away because he's a little afraid of going into a war zone. Now, I'm not saying that war is easy. Sean Parnell can tell you more about that because he spent time in Afghanistan, and I'll tell you, I will defer to that man any single time and twice on Sundays. Not just because he was a captain, but because he actually served time. He was in battle. He is a combat veteran. And I can tell you, as a veteran, a normal veteran, one that didn't serve during combat, there is a lot of respect for those types of people that went and lived through combat scenarios like Sean Parnell did. There's a lot of respect there. That is earned. It's not just handed out. But there is literally no respect, regardless of which way you go, in any veteran worth his salt, okay? Because believe me, there's a whole bunch of veterans on the socials that are talking about not voting for Donald Trump because they think that he is a dictator. Forget the fact that a veteran swore to uphold and defend the Constitution, not the President of the United States. Okay? But I can tell you right now that his cowardice during a time of need, that just wipes the table of whatever he did in the rest of his 24 years. He was being depended upon by those troops, and he let them go, and he let them down. And I know I've got some veterans out there. I know I've got some combat vets out there. And all I'm going to say is this. If you're voting for Kamala Harris, if you're voting for Tim Walz, you dishonor your oath. All right. Wow. Talk about timing. One last thing I do want to show you. There's a couple of other links. There's a whole write-up in the West. What is this? The West Central Tribune that goes through and actually lists every single one of the dates and everything for Tim Walz in terms of his debacle being in charge. Okay. And then I also have another one that kind of talks about the Minnesota governor being accused of stolen valor. It kind of goes through the same thing. So there's several articles that are running out there that are not part of the mainstream media that all talk about all of this. Okay. So just keep that in mind. You may want to look at some of the links that are part of the description in the show notes. All right, everybody, that's pretty much about it for me right now. I can tell you that this ticket is just scary if it gets in. I'm just saying right off the top. But hey, do me a favor. If you like the program, if you like what I do, please head on over to rumble.com, get yourself an account. It's free. And then once you do, okay, go ahead and hit that follow button. Find the American Perspective channel and hit that follow button. If you're already signed in on Rumble, do me a favor and hit those thumbs up before you leave, because that helps me to get onto the Rumble leaderboard and onto the editor's picks board too. I would love to see I'd love to see me hit that one of these days. We will see you tomorrow night, 5 p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. Eastern Time for Whiskey Wednesday. Don't forget, it's Whiskey Wednesday. We will see you tomorrow night for that. Have a great rest of your evening, and good night, everybody.
The previous broadcast was produced and is owned by Active Eye Media LLC. All rights reserved.